Good afternoon and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. After so much political drama in Pakistan, finally the political power shifted from Imran Khan to Mia Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif. To talk about all this and much more about the political crisis in Pakistan, I'm joined by a very special guest from the United States, Dr. C. Christian Fair. Dr. Fair is the professor of security studies at Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University. She's a geopolitical expert, commentator on international relations, and an author. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. A very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Ma'am, I would like to begin the discussion by asking that Imran Khan created a lot of anti-America sentiment in the country, though it was already there, but he ignited that sentiment by labeling the United States behind the whole power shift. So how do you see this, and what was the reason behind this political move of Imran Khan?
So look, I've been going, I can't go back to Pakistan now, right? The ISI will never let me back in, but I've been going to Pakistan since 1991. Which is a long time. When were you born?
2001.
So there you go, right? Your parents may not have even have been married when I first started going to Pakistan. So there's always been a lot of anti-Americanism. It's never, for as long as I've been going, if you look at public opinion polls, it's the number of people, the percentage of people that have a favorable opinion of the United States has never been more than like 20-30%. That's in a good year. So when people say that he has made it even worse, I don't really know how much worse you can make it. But the issue is that it's a very popular sentiment. And so when someone like Musharraf would work with the United States, he was actually going against public opinion, right?
Yeah.
Which is why he had to do other things. So when you come out and you say, I'm against the United States is bad. He was a huge misrepresenter of the US drone program, right? He was howling and screaming about the drone program. He told outright lies. He knew they were outright lies. They were not killing the civilians that he claimed they were. So he ran on a platform of anti-Americanism, and he has run on a platform of anti-Americanism. And I think what he was doing implicitly was that he was criticizing the army by proxy, right? Because the Americans will always support the Pakistan army no matter what it does or what it has done. And so when he criticizes the US, when he criticizes the drone program as he had done, he's also vaguely criticizing the army, right?
Yeah.
And when he came out on such a nasty anti-American platform, he was also undermining the army's interests, right? Because the army's interest is to have good relations with us. They want access to spare parts. They want access to weapon systems. They want access to training. So this, the reason why the Pak army went with him in 2018 was they didn't really have a lot of options other than him. Right? Nawaz Sharif was untenable. The PPP still is. And so he was the only option in town. So there really wasn't any other direction that the army could have gone in. So having said that, we're now in a place where we have Shehbaz Sharif as a prime minister. And I'm not sure what he's going to be able to do in the next year and a half. I don't think at the end of this, he is going to have a lot of popular support. And so for me, the question is, what is the army going to do in the next election? My sense is, Shehbaz Sharif has always had good relations with the military. He hasn't had this antagonistic relationship that Nawaz Sharif has had. My guess is that Shehbaz Sharif will, in the general selection, it will likely be Shehbaz Sharif again. But the army always prefers that people come in with a fragile coalition, right? Because then they can attenuate the strength of that coalition to keep the prime minister weak, so that the prime minister doesn't start behaving in a way that Imran Khan does or did. And then they have the option of doing what they did to Imran Khan, right? Which was to pull the coalition out from underneath his feet.
Yeah. So you talked about army. So what was the role of the army and the deep state in the whole crisis? Were they actually neutral or they were just pretending to be so?
Oh, this is ridiculous. They're not neutral. Everyone knows that they're not neutral. From my point of view, what's been interesting, right? Because ever since Zia put into the Constitution in the Eighth Amendment 58.2b. 58.2b allowed the president to prorogue the government, right? And when Benazir Bhutto became the prime minister after Zia died in the plane crash, that instrument was used to prorogue her government. Nawaz Sharif came in. Guess what? President prorogued the government. Benazir Bhutto came back. She knew this could have happened, so she picked Farouk Laghari as her hand-picked president. And guess what? The army still said to him, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, prorogue the parliament. Nawaz Sharif comes back in. Then we have the coup, right? And so then we have Zardari after Musharraf steps down. Then we have Nawaz Sharif. Well, before, one of the things that Zardari does is that he passes the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment vacated the 8th Amendment, particularly 58.2b. So this put the army in a very interesting position because it now, not only, I mean, it's actually, so Zardari gets a lot of grief, deservedly so. This was an amazing piece of legislation that his party passed and which he signed into law because it essentially removed his extensive powers as president and he restored the balance of power to the office of the prime ministership, right? So he actually said of this, there will be no more coups. And he's right and he's not right. What it meant was that the army could not simply call up the president and say, hey, prorogue the parliament. So the army had to get more clever and it had to begin investing in other instruments of manipulation. And one of the first instruments that we saw fall into the hands of the military, and it was always in the hands of the military to one extent or another, but became a really important instrument, was the Supreme Court. Right. And then we also know that the Pakistan army is very good when you rig an election, you rig it before where you mess around with the voter rolls. You rig it during when you mess around with constituencies, lose ballots, stuff ballots, and you do it after when you try to arrange a government, right, through creating a coalition of the willing / coalition of the billing. So, that's just sort of in general how the army works. And so what they kind of did was they reverse engineered Imran Khan's win, right? So that coalition that the army, General Faiz, was so critical in putting together.
Yeah.
Well,
so continue, ma'am.
No, they put it together. They can put it together for him and they can take it apart.
Yeah, there have been numerous debates around the fact that there is a divide inside the Pakistani army as well. And there are two blocks, like one supports Imran and the other doesn't, of course. So what is your assessment?
Well, first of all, we don't know for sure. We don't know that. I think whether or not they like Imran, it's irrelevant. I think the most important thing is the factions within the army about the army.
Yeah.
That's the most important faction. It really doesn't matter what rank and file thinks of Imran Khan. I mean, look, armies, whether it's in the UK, the United States, or India, armies tend to resemble the rank and file. The rank and file of armies tend to look like the population from which they draw, right? So if overwhelmingly Pakistanis like, cream cheese, then you shouldn't be surprised that the rank and file likes cream cheese. It is because armies draw from the people, right? They tend, that's the nature of armies. And the bigger and the more grassroots you are, the more you're going to resemble the grassroots from which you draw. So it doesn't matter that there are supporters of Imran Khan. It doesn't matter. It's what the corps commanders think. It's because he was seen as being a pawn or a puppet of the military when he began acting like a lunatic, and he did, it makes the army look bad. right? And the army doesn't want to look bad. And so the army course corrects. That's why Musharraf went. Musharraf didn't go away because of the lawyers' movement. It went away because the army felt that he was staining and straining the image and the credibility of the army. So I think the real factions that matter are those that are supportive of Bajwa and those that aren't. Bajwa has made a real hash of things. And this is the most recent example of Bajwa making a hash of things. So he's announced he's going to retire. Okay, after he also, announced extensions for himself. So I'm glad that he has a retirement plan in hand. But I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't go earlier, because the more of a ruckus Imran Khan makes, the army doesn't care about Imran Khan. The army cares about the ruckus, right? Because all of these street protests are really anti-Bajwa protests. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bajwa, he has some grave illness and he says, yeah, I think I'm going to retire before November. I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I'm not a betting person, but I think the odds are more than 50-50 that he goes before November.
Yeah. So, Imran Khan made many false allegations against the US. So what will be the impact of these allegations by Imran Khan on the Pakistan-US relationship? And can you kindly put some light on the fact that how does the White House and the Pentagon see Pakistan today?
So, I mean, I don't know how to put this delicately. The White House doesn't seem to care about Imran Khan. It hasn't cared about Imran Khan. Biden never called Imran Khan. Now, Biden, when he was vice president, he knew exactly who was screwing us in Afghanistan. He knew it was Pakistan. I mean, he's no fool. I mean, he is a fool in other ways, but he's not a fool in this regard. So there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm to go running towards Pakistan. There's a very important review going on at the State Department about what is our relationship with Pakistan going to look like. Of course, there's those ninnies that want to have a better relationship with Pakistan because they, don't know history. There's a small number of people who want to have a more aggressive, coercive policy. Of course, those are people that make my day happy. Then there's a large chunk of people that are just like, let's just keep it as it is. The president just has bigger fish to fry, right? I mean, there's lots of domestic challenges because of the war in Russia. Our gas prices are through the roof. This is going to impinge upon elections that are coming up, right? We've got midterm elections coming up in November. He cares very much about that. And then obviously everyone is absorbed with the war in Ukraine. He's trying to get weapons. I mean, from Biden's point of view, we're done with Pakistan and Afghanistan. We're done. Now, whether or not Biden's right about that is another issue, but there's just not a lot of reason to care. And in any event, everyone knows that Imran Khan's irrelevant, that the person that matters is Bajwa.
Yeah. So do you think that these allegations by Imran Khan hampered the Pakistan-US relationship, or you can say the Army-US relationship as well?
Look, I mean, Imran Khan was never taken seriously here. Right? I mean, he just wasn't. I mean, people were not. I mean, everyone kind of saw him as he was, which was the clown. People saw him for what he was. He's a prime minister because of the general selection, not because of a general election. Massive rigging took place. So, I mean, the United States, though we do lots of things that are foolhardy, when it comes to Pakistan, we do have the Indians, for example, may find it very frustrating that the United States, knowing what it knows, doesn't punish Pakistan. But the United States has a pretty good understanding of how the place works. And everyone sort of understands that Imran Khan is a joke. He's irrelevant. And decisions about the US-Pakistan relations has nothing to do. They have nothing to do with him. They have everything to do what's Pakistan's strategic interests. And those strategic interests are embodied by the army. What will the army do? What's the limits? If you were to think about what's the overlap of US security interests and Pakistan security interests, well, the overlap is very small. What can the US do to make that overlap larger? Well, people will disagree. I believe there's nothing, but then there are optimists who believe they can do more. And when in that calculus, who is the prime minister? It's not important, with one exception. The prime minister can either make the job easier of the army, or it can make the army's job harder. And Imran chose to make the army's job harder. So Imran doesn't matter in these deliberations.
Yes, ma'am. So, what is your overall assessment of Shehbaz Sharif as a leader, and how long do you think he's going to serve as the Prime Minister of Pakistan? And do you think that in his tenure, Pakistan is going to be a bit soft towards India in its approach? Although it's a fact that Indians don't take Pakistanis now seriously, and it hardly matters to us what is their approach towards us. So, but still, what are your thoughts on the same?
So he does what. So look, unlike Imran Khan, he is close to the army. Like, I mean, in the sense, he naturally is close to the army, right? Imran Khan had a utilitarian relationship. You elect me and I let you run the show. Shehbaz understands that he serves at the leisure and pleasure of the army chief. Shehbaz understands this, right? I mean, Imran Khan was delusional. He thought that he was actually the prime minister instead of the mayor of Islamabad. So I think Shehbaz Sharif, he's going to take his cues from the military. The military, apparently, according to Bajwa, wants less antagonistic ties with India. That just means it doesn't want a hot conflict, right? It's got its hands tied, propping up Afghanistan and dealing with the Pakistani Taliban. It doesn't want a hot conflict with India. And by the way, you could see this when you had the accidental launch of the BrahMos missile.
Yeah.
If Pakistan wanted a hot conflict, it would have had the grounds to do that. And Pakistan acted surprisingly mature. I mean, it was like surprisingly de-escalatory, right? Like, well, it had to have been a mistake. I mean, that's not the most obvious position that Pakistan could have taken. So, but of course, it doesn't want peace. And Shehbaz Sharif is no fool here either. He saw what happened when his brother and Vajpayee came the closest to forging peace. You got Kargil. And I think, to your point, you were spot on, right? My view is the Indians should just stop caring about peace with Pakistan, because whenever the two prime ministers get together, share matching vests, and walk down a street together in any major city in South Asia or beyond, there's a terrorist attack in India, always. And that's because the army doesn't want peace. Peace is really bad for the business of the army, is bad for what the army wants to do. And it's just bad in every way, shape, or form for the Pakistan army. Peace would make it irrelevant. It doesn't want to be irrelevant, right? So thinking about peace with the prime minister, it's irrelevant. It's possibly dangerous. I've been advising against it for, I don't know, 15 years. Because since Kargil, I mean, Kargil was like the biggest lesson learned. If the army doesn't want peace, and if you know the army, you understand they don't, then talking about peace and acting towards it is literally asking for a terrorist attack.
Yeah. Ma'am, I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that how do you see Pakistan's future in the coming few years? Is there a possibility of civil war, as many experts have claimed, or they will act maturely and will abide by the constitution?
I don't know who these experts are. I mean, look, there's always some joker who's like, Pakistan is falling apart. Pakistan is falling apart. And, I just wait them out. They just remind me of my dogs barking. If you just let them bark, they'll finally tire themselves, because, they're not going to get what they want. So Pakistan's not, at one level, Pakistan has always been at a civil war. Right? If you look at the data, there's always been this ongoing, simmering problem with Balochistan. It's a civil war, right? It's the Baloch don't want to be in the Pakistani state, and the state tells them to shut up. And the state has used very heavy-handed instruments of coercion to deal with it. Yet the Baloch keep coming. And I think we could say, there has been very significant levels of conflict within Pakistan with the Pakistani Taliban at different periods of time. there's always been levels of significant sectarian violence. And I don't just mean Sunni on Shia. I mean Deo Bundy on everyone who's not Deo Bundy, right? So, Pakistan's always at this low level, ranging between low and high levels of conflict with itself. But the idea that Pakistan is going to break up is just such wishful thinking. I can't really entertain it. The army the army is just great at getting Pakistanis to support it when it kills Pakistanis. And the biggest tool it has at its disposal is to call the people that they're killing Indian agents, right? The Baloch are Indian agents. The TTP are Indian agents. And when you're killing Indian, and my favorite, I love my job. My favorite is when after the stuff that was going on in Fatah, they began saying that the suicide bombers they were not circumcised. And what does that mean? Ooh, they must be Hindu. They're not circumcised. And so I was in Pakistan and they were telling me this. And I said, wait, you mean to tell me that the ISI has an incinerated foreskin inspection unit? Can we just, you got to find that humorous. The dude has just blown himself up in a suicide bombing, and here's the ISI. Oh, katua nahi, bilkul katua nahi, Hindu hoga. Come on. No, it would be in Punjabi. Katua nahi, Hindu hovega. Gotta laugh at the absurdity of it. I remember after a terrorist attack on the Karachi airport, the head of the Rangers comes out. The terrorist was not circumcised. It's like, whatever. How do you not? And if you go through my students, they never believe me. See, Google this. Just go and Google uncircumcised terrorists. It's a thing. But can you imagine the genius of ISPR coming up with that? That is just friggin' genius. So anyway, there's not going to be civil war. I'm sorry. The Pakistan army is, as long as it's large and in charge, and it always will be, that place is the most stable in stability.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time and for your kind words. It was a pleasure hosting you. Thank you once again for joining.
All right. Thank